Chicago and Washington, D.C., communities are growing increasingly fearful of what they describe as federal agents' unchecked and often violent use of force. And now, in response, residents are tracking and recording their tactics on a daily basis. Let's take a look at what's being caught on camera in just the Chicago area. There's this viral moment in which a pastor, Reverend David Black, was shot by pepper balls directly in the head as he joined protesters outside of an ICE facility. In response, DHS released a statement that read in part, quote, "If you are obstructing law enforcement, you can expect to be met with force." We'll leave it to you to decide if what you are seeing in this video constitutes obstruction. Then, on Wednesday, a group of masked ICE officers forcefully dragged two women out of their car outside of an elementary school. Watch.
Wait, you guys came to the school and to do this?
Do you have a warrant? They haven't asked for a warrant. My name is Jocelyn from Cicero. They don't have a warrant. They didn't ask for one. They forcefully opened the door of the truck. It was locked. It was locked.
You're being recorded. Just don't get any closer from me, all right? Like, we'll just stay back, please. You're being arrested for speaking.
Yeah, but you guys came to the school?
They forced us out of the car. They forced us out of the car. They were following us.
And then there's also this video that went viral yesterday. WGN journalist Debbie Brockman was forced to the ground and handcuffed by 3 federal agents as she was reporting. DHS said that Debbie was arrested for allegedly assaulting a federal law enforcement officer. But we have been presented with no evidence of that. Her employer, WGN TV, said that she was not charged with a crime and ultimately released. Anthony Coley is back here with us. And also with us, MSNBC political analyst Jelani Cobb. He's a staff writer for The New Yorker, dean of the Columbia Journalism School, and author of the forthcoming book, 3 or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here, 2012 to 2025, which will be available in hardcover this Tuesday. Jelani, let's start with you. I guess your reaction just to the last clip I showed there of what happened to Debbie Brockman of WGN, the treatment of journalists and then the smearing of journalists after, that they would release a statement implying that she's violent at a time when they're labeling protesters as terrorists, but have presented reporters with no evidence of her doing anything of the sort.
But it's also consistent with what we've seen. And so going all the way back to 2016 campaign, where we were being called the enemies of the people, where Katie Tur was singled out for derision and jeering from a scene where she was reporting by Donald Trump. We've seen this as a kind of incrementally increasing pattern, not to mention quaint ideas, like in the first case, habeas corpus, or in this instance, the First Amendment. And the irony here is, of course, that we've heard nothing but free speech, First Amendment, from people on the right, as they steadily crank up the anger and the intensity of the repression being directed at news reporters. And so it's incredibly hypocritical.
What do you make of what do you make of the attack that not just that's happening on journalists, but the idea that these people are Antifa and terrorists and trying to frame this as domestic terrorism? Because for me, it conjures up something that obviously we follow overseas, which is if you label everybody as a terrorist, it then justifies the use of force against them. And we saw that with the pastor there who was standing in what appeared to be prayer, getting shot in the head, and then people going on Newsmax and other sources saying, well, these are all members of Antifa. Antifa is being designated as a domestic terrorist organization. There go justifying the use of force against them.
Well, I mean, when we look at, really banner international actors like Vladimir Putin, we can see this exact sort of pattern. And when you see, a dissident speak out, or you see people protest, or you see people raise questions about what the regime is doing, what they typically say, and the irony, of course, here is that these are American agents. These are people who are acting at the behest of the CIA, right. Or they are people who are, counter to the best interests of the nation. And we're seeing that being replicated in the United States. It is the textbook standard behavior of autocratic governments, around the world. We could list the regimes where you see this sort of behavior happen. none of this goes to the point of furthering democracy. As a matter of fact, that's not even consistent with what we see as the agenda here. Even in the 2024 presidential campaign, the main agenda that Donald Trump articulated was one of retribution. And saying that, the language of the enemies within and so on. This is what you see in societies that are primed for real social volatility, for real significant amounts of violence. And it's incredible to see that this is happening increment by increment by increment, and that we've already gotten to this extremely dangerous place.
Anthony, do you think that the videos will inure people, kind of lull people in becoming used to this kind of violence and activity, or will they make people successful in potential lawsuits? I mean, there's already been a lawsuit, 3 different lawsuits just this week in Chicago, where protesters and the city and the state have been victorious, at least at this stage. One centered on the treatment of clergy members, journalists, and protesters when they are confronted by law enforcement, and sought to put limits on the way officers could behave. Although I've already spoken to some activists who say that they haven't changed their tactics and their behavior at all in the last 48 or so hours. But do you think they'll be able to use this kind of material to build their case, and ultimately this kind of constant recording culture will actually save people?
The constant recording culture is the right way to think about it, right? I think I go back to George Floyd, right? We wouldn't know about what happened to him unless there was a citizen recorder right there, right? And so if there is any silver lining on all of these things, is that people are, number one, showing up, but they're actually documenting history. And in terms of people showing up here, the fact that this priest was there, like, this matters. We were talking about this before the segment. I've been doing a lot of rereading history. And one of the lessons from history, we got this from Dr. King's letter from our Birmingham jail, is that it is important for all aspects of civil society, white moderates, business leaders, corporations, colleges and universities, to stand up and to speak out. We saw the Pope this week weigh in on the treatment of immigrants, right? That's the type of collective response we need in this moment. And that's one of the things that gives me hope about what I saw in Chicago, right? The history, the lesson from a Birmingham jail.
Johnny, your book covers 2012 through the current and the protests, the movements that have happened over over a decade or so now. Donald Trump this week said that Chicago officials, including the governor and the mayor, should be in jail. What do you make of that escalation in rhetoric, and what kind of point do you think that we're at with protest and with escalation in this country?
I want to pick up on something Anthony said about this, which is, I covered George Floyd and his death, as many of us did. And I have been covering policing, I've been covering excessive use of force for 20 years before that. The thing that I took from that, which I think is also applicable to what we're seeing with ICE and with the excessive use of force and the kind of random targeting and profiling of people, is that I covered, when I saw George Floyd, I was in the worst position to recognize how significant that was, because I had seen so many egregious instances that were just bureaucratized, and they were turned into a kind of academic exercise where there'd be some sort of tribunal or a panel, and it'd be declared as something other than what it actually was, and then it would go away, and maybe there's some civil settlement after the fact. When the public saw this, though, it shocked the conscience. And we saw that it just radiated first locally, then statewide, then nationally, then internationally. We don't know. Like, we saw a clergy member be pepper sprayed or hit with the pellets. And we saw, we've seen people yanked out of their cars. We saw the father of the 3 Marines who was, all of these things that are kind of incrementally building up. But there will be something that crosses a line. And it's very difficult for us, even those of us in the news media, to necessarily have a sense of what that line is.
Or what that moment
will be. But there will be something that shocks people's conscience. And the last thing that I'll say about this is that the thing that I think about historically is the Fugitive Slave Act, of 1850. And what that did was say that if people who had escaped slavery, there was a federal bureaucracy that would be charged with dragging them back into bondage.
Right.
And people would be authorized to do this. What that did was take people who had previously ignored the issue of slavery, who maybe they didn't care about it, they didn't think about it, but all of a sudden you're seeing your neighbors being dragged in shackles. You have instances like in Boston where 20,000 people come out to try to prevent someone from being dragged back into slavery. What they are doing is injecting the politics of immigration into the lives of people who might otherwise try to ignore this issue. And it creates a kind of recipe for a widespread social response to it.